Simon Peter was a fisherman. The skin on his face was deep, deep brown, burned by the sun and the wind on the water. His hands were hard and calloused from pulling on unnumbered ropes and cords and nets. His back was sore from years of back-breaking labor. But more than anything, his spirit was broken by living year in, year out in hopelessness. For the life of a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee was so hard. The lake was teeming with fish, in fact. Catches could be excellent near Capernaum. But it was the way that the system was set up in such a way that fishermen could never win, that broke his spirit. And that was all thanks to King Herod Antipas. What with the rental on the boat, the fees that he had to pay, what it cost to process the fish at the plant at Magdala, and the taxes, always the taxes. Peter found that he could just never get ahead. A good fisherman could work day in and day out all month long and end up further in debt at the end of the month than he was at the beginning of it. And that is why, when the new teacher from Nazareth came along, bringing out his new lessons, Simon Peter did not hesitate. He walked away from it all. He left his boats, he left his nets, all of it. Because he recognized that he wasn't leaving anything behind except for a life of continual frustration. He was escaping, that's what he was doing. But as he followed that man, all over Galilee, and eventually even to Jerusalem, and as he knelt and as he sat and he listened to that incredible teaching that came from that man's lips, he learned wonderful truths. He learned of God's love and care for him. He learned about the kingdom of God and how it belonged to the meek and the poor, people like him. And he heard words of power so strong that they could heal the sick and conquer even death. And in the last years, Peter had heard so much truth, and he had absorbed it all. But here was the thing. Deep inside, Peter was still the same fisherman he had always been, always living on the edge of survival, always not daring to hope for something better for the future. Because that's who he had always been. That's who he had grown up to be. And so it was that when the disciples were in Jerusalem for the Passover feast, and during the meal, Jesus stripped off his clothes, wrapped a towel around his waist, and grabbed a basin full of water. Peter knew what it was all about, because Peter had heard the lessons before. He'd heard the time when Jesus had said, "Whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave." And then there was the time when he had said, "The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted." See, Peter had heard that message over and over and over again. He could repeat them in his sleep. And so he knew what this was all about. And he really wondered why. Because he'd heard it all before. And so, as Jesus approached him, Peter opened up his mouth and he said, "Lord, are you really going to do this? Are you really going to wash my feet? I've heard this. I got the message. I don't need a demonstration. probably is what all of them were thinking. But Jesus' response made Peter pause. You do not know what I'm doing, he said, but later you will understand. No, no, Simon said, you will never wash my feet. I'm not going to stand for this. And that is when Jesus said what it was really all about. Unless I wash you, you will have no share in me. Or take the case of King Ahaz. King Ahaz was in a really tough spot. He was surrounded on every side by enemies. Two powerful kings, the king of Israel and the king of Aram, had ganged up against him. And Ahaz knew that there was no way his small, pitiful little army could ever stand against such people. Everything he knew about politics, everything he knew about reality told him that this was going to end really badly. And actually, it was just at the moment when all of this became too clear to him, when he was out inspecting the water conduit that fed the city, recognizing that there was no way that the city would even be able to stand in a siege because it did not have an adequate water supply. That God sent the prophet, this Isaiah fellow, with a word from the Lord. You know how it always is. No sooner do you sit down to supper, or start inspecting the aqueducts, and then one of these clowns comes along wanting to talk to you about Yahweh. Well, Ahaz had heard it all before. All his life he had heard the message again and again. Put your trust in the Lord. Do not trust in horses and chariots and feats of arms. Trust in the Lord and all will be well. He knew that. He'd heard it. He didn't need some clown coming along to tell it to him all over again. But you see, the prophet Isaiah was wise and he understood something. He understood that maybe Ahaz had heard the message, had put the truth in his mind, but he didn't believe it in his heart. And Isaiah understood that Ahaz needed one more thing. He didn't need to be told again, but what he needed was a sign. So Ahaz was offered something extraordinary. Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. Ask anything, and it will be shown to you, not merely told to you. But Ahaz came back, I will not ask, I will not put the Lord to the test. And I'm sure he thought that he sounded really brave, and that he thought that he sounded like a man of great faith. But he was being a fool. As Peter would be many years later. See, I think that both of these stories, the story of how Peter turned down a foot washing from Jesus and the story of how Ahaz turned down a sign, are really the same story. And it is a story that illustrates a problem that we have, a serious problem. And our problem is this: we just want the information. Give us the facts, give us the technical information, just let us know what we're supposed to know, and we'll take it from there. Just tell us the truth. That's all we want. Of course, that's how we approach most of the rest of our life. You know, we just ask for the information. I mean, for example, you go to IKEA, you buy your furniture. What do you need? All you need is that big sheet of hieroglyphic instructions and an Allen key. And you've as good as got your furniture assembled, right? Just need the information. Or you want to learn how to be a parent. What do? You go and you buy a book on parenting, you read it, and you immediately know everything there is to know about being a good parent. And you never make a mistake again, right? And if you want to learn how to do brain surgery, what do? You sign up for a correspondence course, read the books, and you're good to go. Is that how it works? No. That's not how we learn. We all know that if you really want to learn something, if you really want to master something, you need more than just the basic technical information. You need practice. You need to do it. You need to be shown how to do it. Ideally, you need to do it alongside someone else who's done it before. That's how we learn best. That's how we learn the lessons that really form who we are. By doing, by being shown, not simply by being told. And we know that that's how it works. I mean, how many of you would agree to be operated on by a brain surgeon who learned by correspondence? None. But somehow, when it comes to spiritual truths, we figure, oh, well, I just need the information, that's it. I got to hear it, I got to read it, I'll know it, then I'll be done. Doesn't work. It's not enough. God knows that it's not enough. Jesus tried to teach his disciples about service. How powerful service could be. How when strong and powerful people chose to serve others, it could change the world. And they heard that message. They heard it repeated to them again and again. But the mere information was not enough, was it? Jesus understood that Peter needed a demonstration. He needed to experience the power of service for himself by participation. That's what Jesus means when he says, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. He was not saying that foot washing was some kind of ritual for the entry into the kingdom of God. What he was saying was, you've had this truth, you've heard it, now you need to live it, because only then will you know it. That was the point. In the same way, when Isaiah went to King Ahaz, he was not there simply to deliver information, to tell him how God planned to get him out of this particular crisis. Isaiah was there to teach the king how to hope. And you cannot teach someone how to hope simply by giving them information. It's not going to work. Because Ahaz had all kinds of reasons not to hope. Very practical reasons. Reasons based on his own experience. And so Isaiah understood that he needed more than information. He needed a demonstration. He needed a sign. He needed to live that truth for himself. And since Ahaz wouldn't choose the sign, the prophet got to. And I think it's telling the demonstration that Isaiah chose. A child. A child will be born, he said. And no doubt the child he was talking about was a child who would be born to Ahaz himself. Because he seems to be talking about a young woman that anyone there would have known about. Chances are it was a woman that the king had just married. Or maybe that one that he was about to. What Isaiah was saying was this. He was hoping that when Ahaz had his son, and as he raised that son, and as he took care of him, and as he loved him, and as he dreamt about the future of that son, he would be able to have hope. A new life can teach you hope like nothing else. And that hope would have a name. That name would be Emmanuel. God is with us. During this season of Lent, I've been trying to focus on a very particular problem we have in the church. And it is a problem with one of our central activities. It is a problem with the practice of preaching. And the problem is it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the best preachers in the world can get up and they can preach the best sermons. They can preach the truth. The truth about God, the truth about Jesus Christ, the truth about you in relationship to God, the truth about the universe. And you've all heard those truths before. And you will hear them again. And the problem is that far too often people hear earth-shattering truths, and yet it doesn't change anything in their lives. Their lives just go on as before. And the reason why that happens, I think, is this. We all have episodes in our past. We all have things that have happened to us. Often bad things. Trauma, episodes of abandonment, abuse, loss, grief. Some have really severe traumas in their past, some have less severe, but we all have them. We all have things that have happened to us. And the problem is that those bad things that we have in our past have taught us things. Taught us things about ourselves, about God, about the universe. Things that are not true. False beliefs that we have because of what we've experienced. And the thing is this, when you learn a lesson like that because of a bad experience in your life, you will hold on to that lesson. So if you come to believe that you're unlovable, say, you will hold on to that lesson. And it doesn't matter what information is given. It's not going to change that because you believe it deep down inside. Well, what we do in preaching often is simply we try to correct false beliefs by simply giving more information. Doesn't work. Because you're never going to overwrite a deeply held false belief simply by giving information. And that's the problem with preaching. It's just not enough. So what do? Do we give up? No. Because here's the good part. There's a loophole. There is a way in which the true preaching of the Word, hearing it proclaimed, reading it, learning it for yourself, can actually transform you. But not simply because you've heard it. If you just hear it, it can go in your brain, you can remember it, it's a truth that you know, but it doesn't change your heart. But if you do something with it, if you take a truth that is proclaimed to you and you put it in practice, what happens? You have a new episode in your life. And that new episode can teach you truth about God or about yourself or about the universe in a very different way. For example, say you want to learn to trust in God. Well, here's the problem. You can go and you can read every Bible passage about trusting God. You can commit them all to memory. You can listen, you can read all of the books that have been written on the subject. You can listen to every sermon. You will know everything there is to know about trusting God, and yet you will have no trust in God. But if you take just a little part of that truth and do something with it, in other words, put yourself in a position where you are depending on God and no one else, what will happen? God will come through for you. That's what Jesus promised. God will come through for you. Maybe not in the way you expect, but God will come through for you. And you will have learned that you can depend on God, you can trust in God, and you will know it in a way that no sermon, no word could ever convince you. What I'm saying basically is this: don't just listen to the sermons, don't just read the scriptures, don't just read the devotional books. That won't change anything so long as you don't take at least a part of it and do something with it. Put it into practice. And I mean do it practically. Come out and help at a Thursday night supper and social. Volunteer at a clothing cupboard or at the food bank. Do something to take what you have learned and put it into practice, and the lessons that you will receive will be able to transform your life. That's the root. That's what can make preaching and reading and studying the Word truly transform your life. Will you take a few moments and silent your